about the worst person you know. Just take a moment if you can stand it, to really clearly imagine them in your minds. Oh yeah, we all know the type. You can't stand them. They're always getting on your nerves. They're the worst, and even worse, they're coming up to you with a recommendation to watch a new TV show. Let's be honest. Out of principle, we're not watching that show. There's no way. There is no way we would do that, because if we were to watch that show and heaven forbid actually like it, then we would have to suffer the fact that he was or she was right all along and see it in their smug face. No way. This is actually the true story of why it took me 5 years to finally getting around to listen to Hamilton the musical. Now, imagine that this same person comes right up to you, leans in, and then starts judging you for using a straw or eating a hamburger. I think a lot of us have been on the receiving end of judgment like this, and honestly, it kind of sucks. Now, I'm not here to say that environmentalists are the worst person you know. Obviously, I'm one of them. I'd like to think they're good, well-intentioned people. But even as one of them, when I'm on the receiving end of judgment like this, my knee-jerk reaction is often to push back and not want to do what they're asking me to do, even if I agree with them. And they're not wrong, necessarily, but it is fair to ask, are we leading too often with guilt and shame to get people into caring for the planet? I'll share a personal example. When I tell people I work in sustainability, oftentimes people will say, "Oh, that's cool," or "Tell me more." But just as often, they'll say something like this. "Oh, well, I wish you would have told me I wouldn't have eaten a burger in front of you," or, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm normally better at recycling." People are preemptively apologizing to me when I tell them what I do, because I assume they think I am there to judge their behavior. And I love that there is an amount of environmental awareness among them, but I'm a little bit concerned that the prevailing understanding of sustainability for many people is guilt and shame. And worse, I'm worried that it might be counterproductive, because if we're going to solve this big planetary crisis, we need to be effective. So what might that look like? Walk with me back to the 90s. I am a 90s kid. I was born in 1991. For those of you who have not seen this show before, it is Captain Planet, one of my favorite shows of all time. It is all about how we can come together to fight the polluters and win. It was heroic, it was exciting, and it made sustainability fun. And then something happened. We started to get a better understanding of the size of the challenge in front of us, and we moved to the 2000s, where the post-apocalyptic genre really took hold. We had moved away from envisioning a world where we could save the planet, and instead became obsessed with what we would do once we had failed. I think about this article written in 2022 by Michael Lee of Kotaku quite often. It's titled, in the video game space, simply, "Video games are giving up on the idea that we can try to save the world," or that we can save the world. I think about this a lot because for many artists and for many people, the notion and the challenge of climate change and the climate crisis in front of us has become so massive and so dire, it is almost somehow easier for us artistically to understand and explore what life would look like after we fail, rather than what it might look like to succeed. In my book, I call this climate doomism. And it's very simply put, if everything is broken and it can't be fixed, then why even bother trying? Why should I have to change my behavior if nothing matters? Why should I have to give something up when it's really the other people or the big companies that are the problem? Why should I have to stop doing this thing I love because you haven't given up something else yet either? We're constantly around this, and it's mixed with headline after headline of depression and activists constantly telling us about all these planetary heartbreaks. We are being overwhelmed, we are being beaten down. And it's putting us in crisis mode. Now here's the thing about humans, we're usually pretty good at reacting to crises, as long as they're short. If this place were to catch on fire right now, and hopefully it doesn't, I think we would all figure out a way to get out safely. But what if the house is just simmering. Climate change is a multi-decade crisis, and many of us have been in crisis mode for too long. And it's leading to anger, it's leading to burnout, and in some cases it's leading outright to inaction, which is the exact opposite thing of what we need if we're going to have a chance to solve this thing. So, if the language that we're using potentially is having the opposite effect of what we need, then is it worth revisiting the language we use? Or even more boldly, is it worth asking ourselves, what would it look like to make sustainability fun again? Now, I want to be very clear. What I am not saying is that the people at the receiving end of these climate disasters should be happy that their house has been swept away by a flood. Of course not. That is awful. But for those of us who are fortunate enough to work on the solutions, we need to start pragmatically looking at joy and optimism as tools to be more effective and have more impact. And as for the why, I think it's important to remember that we as humans, we exist within much larger organizations of people beyond just ourselves. In our personal lives, all that we really need to do to make a change is to convince ourselves to do it. But if we're thinking about our workplaces and our communities, we need many, many more people inside and outside the systems to be willing to believe that it's worth trying to make a difference. Here's the thing though, they're probably not as riled up about sustainability as you are. But we need to get them there. We need to pull them out of inaction or pull them out of their climate doomism that they might be in. And as for the why, and this is my single most profound realization as a director of sustainability in the corporate world, is that it's not the small but mighty sustainability team that goes it alone to try to save the day. It is the way in which they work with the regular people, with regular jobs, the marketeers, the engineers, the software developers, the coordinators, the financiers, the people who actually are on the ground implementing things and making things happen. They're the ones, without sustainability in their titles, actually making a lot of the work happen. So if that's the case then, we need to think about what's going to activate them, and if we try to lead with guilt and shame, especially for people we have no leverage over, then their very human nature response might very well be to shut us out. Now, if we need to think about changing the language, that's certainly one thing, but we also want to make this fun again, right? So what if we were to give them a shiny new toy to play with as we ask them to get involved in sustainability? And it's not a Captain Planet action figure. It is something way more nerdy. It is the life cycle assessment, which is a carbon accounting tool in environmental science. I love this stuff. Let me walk you through what a life cycle assessment is. This is an attempt to look at the impact of a product across the totality of everything involved with trying to make it happen. Briefly, quickly I suppose, you can look at it in 4 different major categories. First, the impact to make it, literally going all the way back into the supply chain to the mining of the raw materials, to the smelting of those materials into parts, to the eventual assembly of those materials into a final product. We look at how we move it from the manufacturing plant to the distribution center, all the way to the store, and even the way that we drive it home. We look at how we use it, which is the one that we are the most intimately familiar with because we get to do it every day. And then finally, how we lose it, or the energy required to landfill, incinerate, or hopefully recycle it. This is an amazing framework for every product we can imagine, but I'm showing you up here a laptop, and I'm going to invite some audience participation. We're so used to using our devices, I want someone to guess, for the totality of the lifetime of emissions of a laptop, what percentage of that total impact do you think comes from using it?
80%.
We got an 80%. 80-20, okay. 5, okay, we're all over, but this is good. See, we don't know, but I'm going to give you the answer. It's 15. The amount of energy it takes to make a laptop, it's equivalent to using your computer for over a decade. That is crazy. There's a hidden impact of making things that we didn't really know before we were handed this shiny new toy. And you know what? This is Awesome. This is so cool. We get to know this now, and because we know this, we know the carbon footprint of every individual component in the entire product and every single way you can use it. Now we can start to move and act against it. If you're in a company, you know then that you can, oh, well, if there's a hidden cost of manufacturing things, we should start looking at decarbonizing our supply chain. Or if you're a consumer, you say, oh, well, I know that I should probably think about buying a refurbished device instead. This is leading to the joy of discovery, the joy of tackling tough problems, the joy of innovation, but most importantly, the joy of being able to actually measure the things that we're doing and understand if what we're doing is actually making a real impact right away. Now, I want to say that this is still kind of like a beta version of the toy. It's really only become popular over the last 5 years in corporate America, but even beyond that, like, there are things that are not included here. So if you're using this laptop, for example, to, I don't know, run hardcore AI models in the cloud, to do oil and gas exploration, then yeah, this will look a little bit different. But this is where we get to kind of collectively redefine what the next version of this toy is going to look like, so that we can continue to get more and more and more certain about where the impact actually is, so we know where to make a focus. This is so cool. We are the most empowered that we've ever been in human history to know how to actually make a difference. I think that is neat. And you know what else is neat? Is applying this to literally everything in your life. Now, here's what's fun. I just talked about a laptop. I mentioned earlier, I am an author as well, and I've written a book. And the thing is, I asked my publisher, Wise Inc., because I know about this life cycle assessment, hey, what if we try to make the most sustainable book you've ever made? And they responded with, well, it depends on how good of a writer you are, I suppose. And yeah, sure, but like not the words, the actual book itself. What can we do with this? And to my publisher's credit, they're like, we have no idea, but this sounds like a fun challenge. Let's see what we can go and do. So we started by saying, well, hey, if we know there's a hidden cost to make things, why don't we start by seeing if we can make as few as possible? I have learned that publishers don't like that question because they hear, how can we sell as few books as possible? But there are still cool ways that you can change the book to be longer lasting. For example, you might not know this, but your average book today has a glued binding. And that glue is low quality, and it will often degrade quicker than it needs to, so the book might not survive across multiple owners. You can't see it from the audience, but here, we went with sewn thread binding instead, which is a longer lasting, more durable way to bind a book, so many people can potentially use the same copy. Even further, why stop there? Let's make sure that every library in America is able to buy this book, because if dozens of people at a library can all check out the same book, that's dozens of extra books we didn't need to make for people to be able to get the value of the book. Well, how about what we did on the cover and the pages? So on the cover, I'm going to do something fun. I'm going to, I think, make a couple people sad with this realization, but do you notice that my book is not shining when I move it? Do we know what makes a book shiny? Yeah, it's plastic. It's always plastic. But we learned that. We said, okay, well, if that's the case, then let's avoid putting plastic on this thing altogether. So no shininess, save some money, no plastic wrap, get plastic out of the equation. But what about the pages themselves? So we said, well, if we know that making things is often a hidden cost, what if we try to make as few pages as possible? Without reducing the readability or the content, we said, well, hey, why don't we just try to make them be as tight to the edges as possible? That way, more words per page, fewer pages. Awesome. So we did that too and said, well, wait, well, for the pages that remain, what about the pages that are still left? What can we do there? And we said, well, hey, instead of using virgin paper, why don't we use 100% post-consumer recycled waste paper along with partial vegetable-based inks? So then we did that instead, and we started to measure this. So I mentioned our friendly life cycle assessment tool. There's one from the Environmental Paper Network, the Paper Calculator 4.0, and we plugged in all this stuff and said, hey, for what we're doing for this book, what is the impact? And this is the kind of stuff we never got to see before. These changes for my initial run saved 24 trees, 2,000 gallons of water, 10,000 pounds of carbon dioxide. This now is over 50% lower carbon footprint than had I not done any of those things before. And if you can believe it, even after all that, now it's about the equivalent of 1 year of charging a smartphone is what it takes to make one book. And normal books are worse than that, especially the textbooks you're all reading. So We're looking at everything. We're even looking at some things that we didn't do. And I'll give you a great example, is the fonts. And so you say, okay, Charlie, come on, what can you do with fonts? But think about it, how much ink do you really need to make the letter A? What if you can hollow out the letter and only use the outlines, and then you can get more than 50% lower ink than you thought? That stuff is really ugly. It is hard to read. It was a good try, but it is not something that we were able to stick with. Apologies to whoever is inventing these. But we're literally leaving no page unturned, pun very much intended, when looking at all the different elements of what to do to just make a book sustainable thanks to this life cycle assessment science. And there's even something further. I mentioned to you that we learned that the carbon footprint of an average book of mine is about a year's worth of charging a smartphone. Well, then why don't we put the book on the phone? Now, we did not invent the ebook. We did not invent the audiobook, but we did quantify what it actually meant as for the impact. And as long as you're not taking a year to read the book, we're talking about hundreds of times the lower impact using it digitally or reading it digitally than you might with a physical copy. Another reason why it was so important to have the optionality for however anyone might want to read it to be able to have that opportunity. Now, across all this, we can't get the impact down to zero. That's okay. Because then we said, well, what can we do to try to offset the remaining impact we can't do anything about? And this is where we started to think about the offset side, and we were able to get the book 1% for the Planet certified. I think that's really cool. That means that 1% of all the proceeds of the book are going to go to environmental charities to try to mitigate some of that remaining impact. So this is just one little fun example of all the ways to make a product sustainable, in my case, a little book. So I think we did all right, right? I think that was a pretty good attempt. Oh, thank you. So, with all that being said, why did we do this? Well, we didn't do it because my publisher had a bunch of climate scientists on staff that were forcing every author to do this. We didn't do this because it was a regulatory mandate. No, we did this because we wanted the book to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. We did this because it was a really interesting product design challenge. It was a really fun exploration in this sandbox of all the little tweaks of every part of the book to try to make it as sustainable as possible. Ultimately, we did it because it was fun. And that's what I want us to take away, not just for the way that we design books, but for the way in which we think about how we engage with all elements of solving the climate crisis. I want us to make sustainability fun again. When we make it more fun, and we make solving the problem more fun, we pull ourselves out of crisis mode, we pull ourselves out of the doomism, and instead re-engage with that childlike part of us that sees the joy in solving and tackling the tough problems just like Captain Planet. If we reroute ourselves in optimism and in joy, that gives us the grounding and the strength to be able to reach for change. So I only have one thing left to say to everybody, which is, if we want to save our planet, let's go have fun. Thank you.